Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'm here to help you with your transfer plans, including 4 free transfers of my own to plan some moves in with. Right then, so let's get cracking with the video, but before we do, if you enjoyed today's video, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, it really would do the world of good for me. It'd be massively appreciated, so thank you very much if you're willing to do so. Let's take a quick look at my Gameweek22 side before talking about the transfers I want to make. It does look like a red arrow at the moment. Now, we've still got Ahmad and Pedro to play tonight. I'm recording this Thursday morning. But Pedro is yellow flagged. If he doesn't play, I'd get Semenyo off the bench. But there is still hope to turn the game week around and make it 7 green arrows in 8 game weeks. In the meantime, though, I've got 4 free transfers, and it is quite tempting to maybe go on tilt a little bit after a potentially bad game week. But my team, generally speaking, I don't think is too badly set. There are a few key weaknesses in my starting 11, which I will go through during the entire length of the video. But to begin with, I really want to focus on that forward line because there's one player in particular who is definitely missing from it. And with 2 players in that front 3 that are frustrating, to say the least. João Pedro obviously being flagged doesn't help. And then Jackson, who's got 1 goal in 8, and obviously only got the assist in Game Week 21 after what was a very unlucky performance, not to bag any of those big chances, to hit the post, obviously to get the yellow card as well. Basically just sums up Nico Jackson as an FPL asset this season. He's been incredibly frustrating, does get returns every now and then, but for 8 million, is he really worth it? So I want to focus my first section on the forward line, and then that will maybe colour my opinion on how I want to use my other transfers going into Game Week 22. Right then, so there's only one man that really tempts me to be bringing in this game week in my forward line. That is, of course, Chris Wood, who's got Southampton at home. It's a fantastic game week to be bringing him in, and his ownership is so high that I'm pretty sure most of you watching this video have either very highly considered bringing him in this game week or have already had him and enjoyed his points over the last few game weeks. So I don't want to dwell too much on the benefits of bringing in Chris Wood, but more about whether Jackson or Pedro are sells going into Game Week 22. Now, of course, if Pedro's out for a longer period of time because he is yellow flagged, then that kind of makes the decision for me, but we've already seen him in training. I think if he misses out against Ipswich, it will probably be because they're conserving him for the Man United game because he's definitely close to returning. And if that is the case, then he's definitely not a hard sell. You could easily hold on to him. The fixtures aren't amazing, but they're also not terrible. He's a 90-minute man on penalties more often than not. And the data, whilst not brilliant, is actually still better than Chris Wood's. So because he's cheaper, because he might be back by that point, I don't think he's a hard sell, but for Chris Wood, I think I'd probably want to make the move. Now, I can't do that in one move because I don't have the money. So in a second, I'll go through different ways I can make up the money with a second free transfer so I can make that move. Now, the other player I can more easily shift to Chris Wood to is Nico Jackson. Now, I've already talked about how frustrating he is, but with Wolves at home and then a good set of fixtures to come, as I'll mention in a second, he's also tempting me just to hold on to. As frustrating as he's been, he's got great data. In fact, it's a whole 50% better than Chris Wood's, which is, again, really quite mind-boggling considering how consistent Chris Wood has been versus how frustrating Nico Jackson has been. The data is suggesting that Jackson is the better FPL pick, but he is, of course, over 1 million more expensive, and he doesn't have the benefit of penalties in his arsenal. So those are the 2 players I can move to Chris Wood for. Nico Jackson would be 1 free transfer, Pedro would have to be 2, and I'd have to make sacrifices elsewhere. But a big part of this comes down to which of these 2 players do I want to get rid of, if any. So now I just want to bring up the fixtures for these 3 players to come because, again, I think this really matters in terms of which player I'd be more willing to get rid of for Chris Wood. Now, Nico Jackson's fixtures are actually quite incredible for the next stretch, all the way through to Game Week 29. They've got home games against Wolves, West Ham, Southampton and Leicester in that period of time, which is fantastic news for attacking assets at Chelsea. So getting rid of Nico Jackson now would definitely have to be with a heavy heart, and considering his minutes are still good, the data is still very good, it would be more to do with the fact that I think that he's just not going to come good in terms of performing versus the data. But the fixtures are fantastic. Even that away game against Man City, I do really fancy him in. And then Aston Villa away, Brighton away, they're not teams that I'd be scared of Chelsea taking on and scoring goals in. But again, he is quite expensive, and that is quite a lot of money to be carrying a player for when he's just not performing against the attacking data he's putting up. Now, João Pedro would be, I think, more tempting to sell if I could do so in one move. The fixtures, like I said, aren't amazing. You've got Man United, Everton, Nottingham Forest, Chelsea in the next 4. I'd say that's middling at best. After that, you do have Southampton, but again, it's a run of Bournemouth, Fulham, Man City, Aston Villa. You wouldn't say that that is anywhere near as standout as Nico Jackson's fixtures, but of course, I would need to use a second free transfer to do that move to Chris Wood. Now, Chris Wood, next to each of them, I would say arguably has the worst fixtures over the next stretch all the way through to game week 30, but starts off with probably the best fixture. So Southampton at home in game week 22 is the golden ticket. That's the fixture that we all really want to have him for. After that, I think he's a hold all the way through to potentially game week 26, but you could maybe even have plans to move off of him around then, or even on game week 26 itself. So Newcastle, Arsenal, Man City, that's not a great little run. You could hold him. Obviously, he's in great form. He's just scored against Liverpool as well. So there's nothing stopping him from scoring against Newcastle, his old club, Arsenal, or of course Man City, who have their own defensive problems. Then it's Ipswich and Man United. So it's not a terrible run, but I think in terms of the way it's set up, you could have a bit of a short-term fling with Chris Wood and then move across to maybe another striker, which I'll explain in just a moment's time as well. Now, based on the fixtures to come, I am very tempted to just hold on to Nico Jackson because they are so good. He is getting good minutes. The data's good. He's doing everything that I'd want an FPL asset to be doing, maybe bar penalties. He's just not getting the goals right now, and predicting how form is going to change or turn in the future is really quite difficult to do. And more often than not, when I've sold a player that's been frustrating but been putting up good data, in the next couple of game weeks, they do tend to come good, or at least that's how it seems to me in my history anyway. So again, with that high bar on transfers I want to implement, it is quite difficult for me to get my head around getting rid of Nico Jackson when he's got all of those factors going for him. And I think the way I'm currently swaying is to try and look at ways to get rid of João Pedro, to upgrade to Chris Wood and find the money elsewhere. Right then, so using FPL.team, which is a fantastic website, do go check it out if you want to plan for weeks ahead. I've brought in Chris Wood for João Pedro. That gives me 3 free transfers left to use, and I need to find 0.9 to make this move viable. So I need to use a second free transfer if I'm not selling Jackson and I am selling Pedro. But it's all about where can I find that money. So Raya in goal has been incredibly frustrating, but in terms of the keepers I can bring in, I would have to look at 4.5 million options, the best of which is probably Henderson, but I don't love the fixtures from a defensive point of view. I'll bring them up now just so that you can see them on screen. And whilst they look good on paper, I'm not so sure that there are clean sheets on the horizon for them. West Ham maybe, but under a new coach, not so sure. Potter looks like he's got them attacking with a bit more flair. Brentford, I don't think there's much chance of a clean sheet there. Man United, probably the same. Everton, possibly, but again, new coach, so you never know. Then Fulham and Aston Villa, both sides that are decent going forwards. So I'm not massively keen on that move. The obvious 2 keepers I'd love to bring in are Sells and Pickford, but neither of which I can afford without using another free transfer and downgrading another player elsewhere. So I'm not massively keen on that. And Pickford would probably be my preferred choice, but it's not a great hopping on point ahead of Spurs. But I would probably want him for game week 24, if at all. So I could probably wait for a couple of game weeks before bringing him in. Now, Arsenal's fixtures in the next 3 probably don't look the best, with Aston Villa and Man City to play. But if you take a wider horizon, they've got quite a lot of good clean sheet fixtures. So looking here, Wolves, Leicester, West Ham, Nottingham Forest up until game week 27. There are chances of clean sheets in all of those fixtures, so I don't think he's a must sell, especially when I have to jump all the way down to a 4.5 in order to do it. If I could get to sells, I think it'd be much more tempting. Now, moving into the defence, there's no way I'm selling Trent Alexander-Arnold. I know he's expensive and I know he's been frustrating, but after Brentford, it's Ipswich at home, followed by the double game week of Bournemouth and Everton, followed by Wolves in game week 25. After that, I'd be open to using him as a bit of a cash cow, where he goes up against Man City and Newcastle. But you don't have to sell him then either, because in game week 28, it's Southampton. Game week 30, it's Everton as well. By that point, we're probably looking at wildcarding, or certainly I am. And whilst he's probably more expensive than I'd like, there's no way I'm getting rid of him this close to a double game week when he's still starting, he's still putting up really good data. Lewis Hall is going absolutely nowhere. He's been phenomenal recently. Bournemouth, Southampton, Fulham to come. I'm definitely not getting rid of him, at the very least until game week 24, more likely game week 25. So Gabriel is probably the only player in that back three right now that I can get rid of, unless I wanted to downgrade Robinson all the way down to a 3.9, but that would give me almost no depth on my bench, and I really quite like having Robinson. In fact, arguably you could even start him this week against Leicester away from home over the likes of a Lewis Hall at home to Bournemouth, or potentially even over Gabriel at home to Aston Villa. Now, Gabriel is the only viable option I can be getting rid of in my backline right now. It would give me 5.3 to play with if I did get rid of him. For me, the most tempting option is probably Daniel Munoz. Now, I'm not loving the fixtures from a defensive point of view, but with Munoz's underlying attacking data, 0.18 XG per 90 is the best among all defenders. If he can even keep a couple of clean sheets between now and game week 30, which is definitely on the cards, at this price and that attacking data, I think it could be worth punting on, especially if it gives me the money to afford Chris Wood as well. Now, Gabriel puts up fantastic attacking data himself, was very unlucky not to get anything from that goal, assist, whatever you want to call it, last night against Spurs, but Munoz is actually even better than Gabriel's as well, so I'm not necessarily missing anything by bringing him in over Gabriel. Obviously, the clean sheets probably take a little bit of a downturn, but a sacrifice does need to be made somewhere, so I don't hate that move as an option if I wanted to get away from double Arsenal defence, but as I mentioned, I don't think you absolutely need to get rid of Arsenal defence, even though they've been annoying. There's a decent set of fixtures now, and I've held them through what was probably a fairly poor set of fixtures for clean sheet potential, and I might as well cash in and get all of the clean sheets from this next set if they're going to keep any at all, of course. Moving into midfield, the options are Mbeumo, Ahmad, or Semenyo to get rid of. There's no way I'm getting rid of Salah or Palmer in any universe right now. Ahmad, I can't really afford anyone for. I'd have to go to a 4.3 million midfielder. There's no one I can get for that price. So I'm not doing that. That leaves me with Semenyo or Mbeumo. Now, Semenyo, the only possible option would be to bring in Tyler Dibbling, which I don't massively hate because I've currently got a lot of bench depth, and most weeks Dibbling would probably just be sat on my bench anyway. And he himself is a natural starter for Southampton. He's their best player right now. So I don't massively hate that. And with the fixtures to come, I think it's a reasonable option. Although I'd be very loath to sell Semenyo, considering the data he puts up is really good. And in only a few game weeks' time, he goes up against Southampton, Wolves, Brighton, Spurs, Brentford, then Ipswich. So that's a great run for him as well. So I'm not massively keen on selling Semenyo, especially when the alternative is someone like Dibbling with lower upside and someone that most weeks I just want sat on my bench. And it would notably weaken my 15 and give me much less bench depth. So that leaves Bryan Mbeumo. Now, with Bryan Mbeumo, there's one player in particular I would love to bring in this spot if I could do so. That's Anthony Gordon. But of course, with 6.8 million to use, I can't go there, which leaves me with a couple of options which do tempt me. Now, Savinho is a player that has been absolutely phenomenal recently. I've had my eye on him for a number of weeks. The problem is, because I've had my eye on him for a number of weeks, it's almost too late at this point. Ipswich in Gameweek 22 is fantastic, but after that, he's unfortunately probably going to be a hard sell. With Chelsea, Arsenal, Newcastle, Liverpool, Spurs, that's about as bad as it's going to get. Even after that, Nottingham Forest away in Gameweek 28, those are some of the toughest defences, and you would expect a drop-off in terms of the data and attacking output from Savinho at that point. Ipswich is, of course, low-hanging fruit, but it's a transfer waiting to happen. So I'm not going to be doing that, even though that is quite tempting for this game week in particular. The other option that I can look at is bringing in a Crystal Palace midfielder. So as I mentioned, from an attacking point of view, I do really like these fixtures. Eze putting up good numbers, got another attacking return last night, of course. So I can bring him in, not for Savinho, obviously, for Mbeumo. And that would give me 0.2 to play with. So that's definitely a possible move. Unfortunately, he's lost penalties to Mateta, though, so that weakens him slightly. And Ismaila Sarr is another option for a little bit cheaper that I might be able to make peace with, let's say. So if I bring in Ismaila Sarr, that gives me 0.9 million to play with, a little bit more wiggle room for future moves. But what it does do is it gives me 2 really expensive midfielders and 3 very, very cheap ones with no midfielders in that mid-price bracket. So getting to someone like Mbeumo, Gordon or Bruno Fernandes is going to be 2 moves in the future if I wanted to do so. Now, especially considering that Gordon's got good fixtures and great underlying data, Bruno's got good fixtures, good underlying data, and of course Mbeumo isn't a hard sell himself, I'm not that massively tempted to make this move either. So going back, although Mbeumo's got Liverpool at home this week, he's probably not a player that I'd love selling either. So after Liverpool, that's the bad fixture. It's Palace, Spurs, and then West Ham, Leicester, Everton. On penalties, 90 minutes, did really well against Man City with no attacking return to show for it. But he's been brilliant this season. So am I really looking at getting rid of him just because he's got Liverpool this game week? And of course, Brentford do tend to score in every home game that they play. I think they've only failed to score once in home games in the Premier League this season. That was against Nottingham Forest, who are a very tough defence to break down. And I do expect chances for Brentford and Mbeumo on the break against Liverpool anyway. So I don't think he's a hard sell, which leaves me with the final option of maybe making a double striker switch of Jackson and João Pedro out, and maybe downgrading Jackson to someone more of a mid-price striker. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the money in another one move to get to someone like a Mateta. If I did, that would be much more tempting, but I'd be 0.2 shy of being able to do so. So the maximum price that I could pay for a striker to replace Jackson is 7.1. That means I can't go for Gakpo, I can't go for Mateta. Gakpo would be tempting ahead of double game week 24, but even if I could get there, would be maybe not the wisest move considering the amount of time between now and the double game week and the fact that Liverpool do rotate those forwards. And Mateta, the data's not as good as Jackson's anyway, and of course I'd need another free transfer to do so. That leaves me with possibly only a couple of options. Now, number one would probably be Wissa, who I absolutely love as an option generally, but do I really want to be going into game week 22 with double Brentford attack against Liverpool, even if the fixtures after that are looking really decent? I think that, again, that's just too much of a downgrade for me from Jackson to make that viable this game week. And although the fixtures longer term are really good, so are Jackson's. So do I need to be getting rid of Jackson to bring in Wissa just to pick up Chris Wood, when I could literally just do it in one move and go straight from Jackson to Wood itself? The other option, which I think even the most diehard analytical managers would struggle to advocate for at the moment, would be to go to Calvert-Lewin. I am absolutely not recommending him as an option. It's more just as a maybe cautionary tale, because I had him earlier this season. He's got the double game week coming in game week 24 with Leicester and Liverpool. He is on I think a 16 game week streak of no goals. There is absolutely no chance I'm going there this week, no matter how cheap he is, no matter how tempting it is considering the double game week to come. There's just no way I'm doing that. So I'm going to undo that and pretend that he doesn't even exist as a potential option. Undai might be an alternative at Everton, but again, I've seen absolutely nowhere near enough of them from an attacking point of view to be recommending an Everton attacker at the very least until game week 24, if at all. So that leaves me in a bit of a spot of bother. I've got 0.9 to find if I did want to upgrade João Pedro to Chris Wood. And as I've explained, not many of these options I'm really in love with at all. I think if I had to make a transfer right now, the most tempting would be possibly to downgrade Gabriel to Daniel Munoz, or maybe to downgrade Semenyo to Dibbling. Neither of which I love, but I do really want to get to Chris Wood as soon as possible because that Southampton fixture is a low-hanging fruit and I do believe he does very well in that. Longer term with Chris Wood, the only thing I should mention is, of course, after game week 25, he's probably not the best player to be holding on to. But as I just described in the sense of Wissa, the fixtures for Brentford turn at exactly that point in time. So if I brought in Chris Wood now, the plan would be very much to get rid of him for Yoane Wissa ahead of this fixture swing. So it wouldn't be a long-term play, but I do think it captures the upside of Chris Wood between now and then. So I need to find a way to do it. It could be for Jackson if I wanted to do it in one move and save myself a lot of drama. The other option is to use 2 free transfers and get rid of either Gabriel or Semenyo. Now, the final option, if I did want to go on full tilt and make more drastic changes, would to not only bring in Chris Wood for João Pedro and to maybe remove Gabriel for Munoz, which I'll show as an example now, but it would also be to get rid of Mbeumo and bring in Anthony Gordon, who is hurting me more and more week on week at the moment. Now, that is definitely chasing points a little bit, 6 attacking returns in a row, but with Bournemouth, Southampton and Fulham in the next 3, there are definitely still points on the board there, and I'm getting absolutely no benefit from Alexander Isak anymore. So if I wanted to go on full tilt, I could still do this without taking a hit. I'd still have 2 free transfers to play with ahead of game week 23, and potentially as many as 3 ahead of game week 24 if I was able to roll next week. This is maybe a move that's on the very outskirts of my mind, but do let me know if you would back me going for 3 free transfers here, bringing in Munoz and Gordon alongside Chris Wood. It gives me a very strong looking team for this game week, but also means that I still have 2 free transfers going into game week 23. So maybe it's not the end of the world. It feels like forcing it a little bit to me, but I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. Now, as we reach the end of today's video, hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you did, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that'd be greatly appreciated. But if you've got any questions or comments of your own, do feel free to leave them in the comments section below and I'll get back to you before the game week 22 deadline.